Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA Oddsmaker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Kuhn, and MMA Journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas and MMA statistics guru Kuhn to break down this Saturday night's UFC 170 pay-per-view event, which goes down from the Mandalay Bay Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, if you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will offer our insight into each bout on the card, and then Reed will come in and provide input on the relevant numbers associated with the fights for all bouts with sufficient data. For this event, Reed will be helping us out on 6 total fights. I'd be remiss if I failed to mention our poor betting weekend for UFC Fight Night 36 last Saturday night. Our premium plays went 0-3 for a 9-unit loss overall, as Gegard Mousasi and Jesse Ronson lost decisions, while Albert Tumenov killed our parlay after a strong start in his bout. Our free play also lost 2.5 units, as Viscardi and Andrade lost a decision on the main card. Now we're clearly looking to rebound this time around. Okay, let's get back to the present. UFC 170 features 11 bouts in total. There will be 6 UFC debuts as well as 4 fighters competing for only the second time inside the octagon on this card. So hopefully we can help you make some informed decisions with all the fresh faces. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on UFC Fight Pass will be an interesting 155-pound matchup between a pair of UFC debuters as Ernest Chavez, 7-0 overall, takes on Denis Sedeno, who is 9-2. Now, Nick, what's the oddsmaker's perspective on this fight?
Sedeno comes in minus 230, the comeback on Chavez plus 170. Looking over the line at 5 Dimes, Sedeno is now minus 300, Chavez is plus 250. So early support on the betting favorite, not really that surprised. Typically that's what happens when we open up lines. Now both these guys are making their UFC debuts, and at 155 pounds, it should be interesting because they're both very solid competitors. Starting off with Sedeno first, I mean, he's typically more known for his striking aspect of the game. He does have some wrestling and some grappling to go along with it, but he's one of these striking-based fighters that mixes things up very well on the feet, has some power, throws some unorthodox techniques, does mix in a lot of kicks to his arsenal as well. So he's a very dangerous striker. And then again, he does tend to have some good timing with his takedowns and his double legs, and has some good ground and pound. His weakness though, I think, is still the ground aspect though, but he does have decent takedown defense. Looking over at Chavez is a very tough guy. I mean, he's probably not the flashy kind of fighter that Sedeno is, but at the same time, I mean, he's again one of these basically a striking grinder type of fighters that has more of a boxing style with his striking. He has decent hands, very powerful punches. He's more of a kind of close the gap, dirty box you type of guy. His grappling, he's got amazing takedown defense. I mean, the bad thing is with Chavez is there's not a lot of footage out there to really get a great view of his overall potential. But so far, from what I can see and what I've dug up, I mean, he definitely very solid as far as the takedown game goes. He could keep the fight standing. He's got good balance in that aspect. He's got a good wrestling base, solid wrestling base. Offensively, not really sure what he's capable of. I don't think his wrestling is going to be that big of a factor, but he probably will try to close the gap on Sedeno and make this a grueling, kind of slower pace type of fight. Again, maybe some dirty boxing up against a cage. He might even look to take the fight to the floor. So this is probably going to be a lot more competitive than the odds currently indicate. I think Chavez is in a good spot to possibly, again, come in as a live dog here and upset Sedeno, because Sedeno's ground game, a lot of question marks around it still, and I do think he does have the advantages here if he does stay outside and pick Chavez apart. He's going to be the better striker, and I think that's what he's going to look to do. So even though Chavez might be a live dog, I'm going to have to pick Sedeno because I think he is a little bit more capable at this point of his career, and he's a little bit better from what I've seen on footage. But again, you cannot confidently, I think, bet Sedeno in this spot because Chavez is going to bring the pressure, he's going to bring the fight, and he's going to be game.
I agree that Sedeno is a little too big of a favorite to just straight outright bet. I do expect him to win this fight. The age difference for these guys is a bit of a wash. Sedeno is 29, Chavez is 30. Both of them are actually champions. Sedeno was the CFA lightweight champ, and Chavez was the Bama USA lightweight champ over in the California area. Now, the big difference here is, I think, training. Sedeno trains at MMA Masters. He works with guys, Ricardo Lamas, Josh Salmon, Amanda Nunes, some really talented UFC level competition. While Chavez, he's at a no-name gym. He's the big fish in the little pond, and as that big fish, he's making his UFC debut, so he's not really working with the best guys night in and night out. Now, in terms of overall striking, both of these guys usually look to keep it standing. I think Sedeno is much better from distance. He's very powerful. He has a primarily kicking-based offense. Very solid kicks, whether it's just straight head kicks. He actually destroyed an opponent with a spinning heel kick. And, he's very capable of pulling out all kinds of flashy, crazy kicks with big power. So that's something to look out for. This guy's definitely capable of pulling off the new performance of the night now that knockout of the night's gone. So I think Sedeno is that type of flashy striker that could really open some eyes here in this opening bout. But Chavez, he's tough as hell. He is a decent Muay Thai striker, but he is really good once he gets inside, closes the distance. He really likes to use the elbows, the knees. He likes to dirty box. And as Nick mentioned, he does have good takedown defense. But I think the biggest thing he's got going for him is he's just aggressive and has a really high output. He doesn't have a lot of power, but he does move forward, and he could potentially keep Sedeno on his back foot repeatedly. So that is something to look out for. Sedeno will occasionally shoot in for takedowns, so if Chavez is coming in way too aggressive, Sedeno could counter that. Although, again, Chavez's takedown defense is pretty solid. But I would not be surprised to see Sedeno put him on his back, although Sedeno does not do much with takedowns, even when he gets them. But overall, I think Sedeno should win this fight, probably by decision. He might get a knockout, but I think both guys might be playing it safe, as we've seen on the prelims in recent UFC fights. Now, the second preliminary bout is a lightweight matchup featuring Rafaelo Oliveira, who is 15-6 overall, taking on Eric Koke, who is moving up to the lightweight division and has a 13-3 overall record. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things?
I opened Eric Koke minus 400, the comeback on Oliveira, plus 280. Since that time, actually, line staying steady over 5 dimes right now. Eric Koke is minus 400. Still, the comeback on Oliveira, though, plus 325. Getting closer to fight day, so lines tightened up a little bit, and more spots have copied and since put up the line as well. And line staying steady for a reason. I think it's at a good spot. I mean, Koke deserves to be a decent favorite. I know he's moving back up to 155 pounds to take this fight. He hasn't really performed at his best recently. I mean, at 145, a lot of people are saying it was due to the weight cut. It just kind of hurt him that bad. I'm not sure. I mean, there's been a lot of things plaguing Koke lately in his career with injuries. And if that weight cut issue is true, I mean, he hasn't performed to his abilities at all. So we do know that. He's getting a fight that he should win in Oliveira. Oliveira's a pretty solid fighter. He's probably a little underrated for 155 pounds. I mean, they've had this guy in the UFC thus far to some solid overall competition. So the guy's record might not be that impressive, but I can understand why. I mean, he's fought nothing but studs overall. He's a very solid fighter. Oliveira has okay striking. His jiu-jitsu game's probably his best attribute. He does look to take the fight to the floor. Has decent wrestling in most cases. But unfortunately for him, he's just gonna not match up too well with Eric Koke here. Eric Koke is the better striker on the feet. I think Eric Koke on the ground, should be able to at least neutralize Oliveira, keep the fight standing, as far as his wrestling base goes. If he is put on his back, his jiu-jitsu and submission game is good enough to at least survive and scramble back up to his feet if he is put in that position. So Koke is the better fighter here. I think he is going to maintain it on the feet, and he should slowly start picking Oliveira apart and possibly finish this fight. If not, he should win a clear decision. So it's hard for me to pick Koke against Koke, I should say, in this spot, because he is coming back up to 155, and I think he's going to be ready and look a lot better than he has recently over a very game Oliveira. So my pick is definitely Eric Koke here.
Yeah, and Eric really has not looked good at all in his two most recent fights. I mean, he got smashed by Ricardo Lamas when Lamas earned his title shot, and then in Dustin Poirier fight, I think a lot of people thought that Koke would be able to at least be competitive, if not win that fight, because it was in his backyard, and Poirier was, coming off of a tough loss, and Poirier was all over him. Poirier dropped him several times standing, so I was very disappointed in Eric Koke's performance. Now, there are a lot of factors that were going against him. The weight cut was an issue. He was out for extended periods of time with multiple injuries. So hopefully that is alleviated by moving up to 155 pounds. And to be honest, Rafael Oliveira is a picture-perfect opponent for Koke to make his debut at the weight class. You know, Oliveira's 32 years old, 1-3 overall in his last 4 UFC fights. Granted, he has faced some pretty tough guys, and he's been finished or rocked in all 3 losses. Oliveira, not much of a striker. I would say below average, does not have very good striking defense. He absorbs a lot of shots, and overall, his best way to win is to get this fight to the ground immediately and keep it there. And I'm not sure he'll be able to do that. We saw Eric Koke usually has pretty good takedown defense, you know, as demonstrated in the Jonathan Brookins fight, but so I really think that's going to be an issue there. And Koke does have a little bit of a shaky chin. I mean, he got finished in the Lamas fight and he got hurt multiple times by Poirier, so he can't be reckless here. And overall, Koke does have good power. He's pretty technical on the feet. His defense is a little shaky, but he's active enough and aggressive enough that he should be able to not only win this, but probably finish it. So, Reed, do the numbers back us up?
They do. You know, I'm looking at the stat line and Koke looks pretty strong, so I'm not really surprised that there's a big line in his favor. He's a younger fighter. He's a southpaw. He's got good knockdown power. He has been clipped, as you said. But also that was twice in the same fight. So his knockdowns, one of them was probably affected strongly by the other. So, I would think he's a little bit more resilient. Oliveira has been dropped 4 times in the UFC, twice as many times. So factor that in. I do think a finish is probably in the making here. Koke's accuracy is much better. His pace is much better. So standing up, he's going to control this thing. And Oliveira, you know, maybe he catches Koke with a haymaker and drops him, but I don't see that happening. I think the odds are very much in favor of Koke, and I probably would also be looking for a finish. The only thing I would check is their takedown potential. Koke almost never goes for takedowns, so he's going to want to keep this standing. I think he probably knows that he has the advantage, and his takedown defense is really, really good. So I think he dictates where this fight goes, and it's just a matter of time when he wins it.
Now moving to the flyweight division, we have a very interesting battle featuring a pair of fighters making their second appearance inside the octagon as Zach Makovsky, who is 16-4 overall, takes on Josh Sampo, who is 11-2. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and what's the betting public told you so far?
Well, I opened Makovsky minus 210 to come back on Sampo plus 160, so some early action coming in on the underdog. Sampo's all the way down to plus 145 right now, but Makovsky's only minus 165, so a little bit more of a line tightening thing again since we're getting closer to fight day than anything else. But make no mistake, a public support early betting action overall coming in on Sampo. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a very competitive fight. Of course, both these guys are kind of top prospects for the flyweight division. Both very successful in their UFC debuts against solid competition, but overall in his career, I think Makovsky has been more impressive. I mean, he puts everything together a little bit better. 125 is obviously a great weight class for him. I think he's definitely at his best in that weight class. Really, you could say the same thing about Sampo as well. But I think Makovsky is kind of the veteran in this spot where Sampo, even though he's pretty good at what he does, he's kind of a grappling-based fighter that has good hands, good boxing, very strong. But Makovsky's pretty much seen it all at this stage of his career. So even though Sampo, I think, is going to be very game and very competitive, I think Makovsky's going to be a little bit more technical in almost every aspect of the game. I think Makovsky's striking is just going to be a little bit better. He mixes things up a little bit more. He has a little bit more boxing, than boxing, I should say. And Sampo uses hands, I think, a little bit better than Makovsky. But other than that, Makovsky's probably a little bit more of the versatile, well-rounded striker is what I'm trying to get out there. As far as the ground game goes, I think that Makovsky has several advantages there as well. Sampo might have a little bit of an edge in pure wrestling, but I think Makovsky scrambles out well from his back if he does get put in those spots, and he can end up in top position more times than not. Pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is kind of a wash, but again, I would BJJ have to give the edge to Makovsky, I think, in that spot as well. I think he's a little bit more dangerous. And now as far as sub defense go though, Sampo has been put in some tough spots, but he's managed to survive, so you gotta give him credit for that. But I still give the slight edge in almost every area of this fight to Makovsky. But I do expect this fight to go back and forth and be very competitive, because that's typically the way the flyweights are. I mean, they're so well rounded and they're like little sparks plugs that, sometimes the judges do have a difficult time scoring the bout. So gotta, I guess, be a little bit cautious when it comes to that end of the aspect, but I favor Makovsky in this fight, and I do think he's going to win more times than not. So my pick is going to be Zach Makovsky to continue his winning ways.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you here. I mean, you just look at these guys, and you just look at the strength of competition. Now, Sampo did fight some pretty tough guys outside of the UFC. He had a nice win over Alexis Villa and a couple other guys, but Makovsky has just time in and time out stepped up and taken on some of the best fighters in the world and put on some really good results. And I mean, how can you not rant and rave about the performance of Zach Makovsky after his UFC debut, where he took on Scott Jorgensen, a top 10 UFC bantamweight who was dropping down a weight class, and, you know, he handled him. It was an incredibly impressive performance by Fun Size, and not only did he win a lot of the grappling exchanges, he actually outstruck Jorgensen on the feet and almost finished him a couple times, had him in some serious trouble with that sneaky left hook of his. Now, people didn't used to give credit to Makovsky for his stand-up, but he's put in the time, and it has shown the guy has some really good left hook. He works some solid left leg kicks, and his countering is pretty sharp. So he's actually turned himself into a decent little striker. Now, Sampo, while he has some power on the feet, I mean, he did hurt Benoit in his UFC debut with a right hand. Overall, he's a lot more of a plodding, slower, thudding type of striker, where if his right hand connects, it can be trouble, but overall he's just not on Makovsky's level in terms of pure technique on the feet. Now, in terms of grappling, I think both of these guys are excellent grapplers. Makovsky is slightly better in terms of winning grappling exchanges, but, you know, Sampo has a great wrestling background. He's very physically powerful, and he gets some good transitions as well. I mean, his transition to finish the fight against Benoit was unbelievable, but he also gets himself in some big problems because he's a little aggressive and risky, and he pursues the finish with going for trying to improve his position, so he gives up things accidentally, and he can get swept, he can be put in bad spots, and I think Makovsky's the type of crafty vet that will take advantage of those situations and put Sampo in those bad spots and keep him there. So I see Makovsky winning just about every aspect of this fight, and I see Makovsky probably winning a relatively easy decision. So, moving on, we have another pair of UFC debuters, and this time in the bantamweight division, as Cody Gibson makes his debut with an 11-3 mark against Aljamain Sterling, who is 8-0 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, a tough one. I mean, both the guys making their debuts, but I did open up Sterling minus 305, the comeback on Gibson plus 225. I'm looking over the line at 5 dimes right now, Sterling down to minus 240 or so, the comeback plus 200. So Gibson getting a little bit more support from the early betting action, as the underdog. It should be another competitive spot. I mean, at 135 again, the bantamweights are tough and they're very scrappy in most cases and tend to be pretty well rounded. And that's what you're going to get in these guys, with both fighters actually. Gibson has been on the scene, the MMA scene, for a long time. I mean, he's kind of a Tachi Pilas vet. So for those that have followed that league, they're going to be very familiar with what Gibson's about. He's got decent striking, nice boxing. He's kind of technical, has a nice 1-2 punch. He mixes in a nice powerful uppercut, which is impressive, as part of his striking aspect of the game. But the problem with Gibson is on the feet, he does tend to get tagged. He, defensively, it is a concern, because he does like to mix it up a little bit. Again, even though he can dish it out, he really absorbs punishment. I mean, he does take it well. His chin is solid, don't get me wrong, but he does get tagged a lot is what I'm basically trying to say. So his wrestling base is even decent. He's got a solid takedown game and solid takedown defense to go along with it. He manages to scramble up, and end up on top position more times than, he is on the bottom. So that's pretty impressive from Gibson. So again, he's a very solid, complete fighter. He is coming in as a late replacement fighter for Lucas Martins. So, that's something to think about as well, but he should be pretty game and be ready to go. Now Sterling, on the other hand, he's also coming in as a late replacement, this time, but he's actually replacing Caraway. So this fight got completely, switched around. and Sterling is one of these guys that have had a lot of hype around him, as far as prospects go, in the bantamweight division for a long time. So there's been that buzz around him. He's a very talented, up and coming prospect. He was a 2-time NCAA Division 2 All-American, if I'm not mistaken. So he's got that wrestling background and that buzz around him in the wrestling world as well. But has translated everything very well, thus far in his MMA career. And he's basically utilizes his striking well to set up takedowns. Now, on the feet, he is a little bit wild at times, but he continues to improve. If you look at his tape, he's getting a little bit more tactical with his strikes, but he does move pretty well. So that's one thing he's got going for him. He's fast. He's light on his feet. He does throw unorthodox strikes, so it can be very tough to defend at times. So he's very game on the feet, even though he's still a little bit raw and developing in that aspect. His grappling, though, is what's impressive. Again, I mentioned his wrestling base, his wrestling credentials. So he does look for takedowns a lot. He's very successful with those takedowns. He's got a decent BJJ game for his level, and he's got good ground control and really ground and pound as well. So Sterling is a very complete prospect. I think he's only going to keep on improving and climb up the ranks in bantamweight, and I do expect him to get the win over Gibson. I think Gibson's going to be very game here and very competitive, but Sterling, I think, is going to find his spot eventually. Could even win this fight by submission, but I think realistically he at least gets a decision win. So got to go with Sterling to make a successful UFC debut.
Yeah, this is the battle between late notice replacements, honestly. We have Sterling, who was coming in on about 4 weeks notice, and Gibson, who was coming in on about 2 weeks notice. So that is factoring into this, but honestly, Aljamain Sterling is a guy that has been on UFC's radar for a while now. He's a really top prospect, very sharp, solid guy overall technically, and he trains out of an amazing gym. He works at Serra Longo alongside, a lot of really top guys like Al Iaquinta, Chris Weidman, and more. So he's day in and day out training with some of the best in the world, and I don't think Gibson has that going for him. Gibson's just more of the, he's hung around, he's worked his way in with a winning streak, and then an opportunity just arose. I think Sterling was in the UFC regardless. So overall, though, I think, Gibson is a decent fighter. He pushes a high pace, although he's a little reckless. He has some decent scrambles on the ground. He's got above average submission ability. He did tap out Chad George, a WC veteran, in one of his more recent fights, but he leaves a lot of openings, and that is scary because he's a little wild and a little sloppy at times. Sterling, he's much more technically sound. 24 years old, he's the CFFC champion, and we've seen 2 former CFFC champions actually debut in UFC in the last month or so. So far they've gone 1-1, but I think Sterling's going to give them a winning record here because he is just so technical, and he does have some pretty solid kicks overall on the feet, but he's nothing that special on the feet. But honestly, neither's Gibson. Where this fight is going to matter is once it goes to the canvas, and I'm almost certain that Sterling's going to be able to do that. He has very solid grappling and submission skills. He's a little over-aggressive at times, but I think that'll pay off against Gibson because Gibson will leave those openings for him to take advantage of. So I see Sterling getting this fight to the ground and either working over Gibson with ground and pound, or more likely potentially getting that submission, because Gibson has been put in some bad spots in the past, and I think Sterling's just good enough to be able to do that. So my pick is Sterling pretty confidently. Now moving on, we have another bantamweight contest with Rafael Assuncao, who is 20-4, taking on UFC debuter and RFA champion Pedro Munoz. So, Nick, where'd you open this one, and how's the public shifted things?
I opened Assuncao -230, the comeback on Munoz +170. Interesting fight, definitely in the bantamweight division, because you have a solid, basically title contender in Assuncao taking on a hyped prospect in Munoz. I mean, the buzz has been around this guy for a long time, fighting on Access TV on some of those cards. Those guys that follow basically Access TV and all those fighters are very familiar with what Munoz has to offer here. And this should be a barn burner, a really good fight. So even Munoz is stepping in on short notice. I mean, the guy's definitely talented, and Assuncao cannot underestimate Munoz's capabilities. I mean, on the feet, I do give a clear edge to Assuncao. I think he's a little bit more of the technical fighter. He's a little bit more advanced at this stage in his career. He's proven himself against more solid competition, no doubt about it. I think he's going to be able to move well and basically land his shots and try to pick Munoz apart on the feet. On the ground, though, I do give the slight edge to Munoz in that spot. I think that the wrestling should neutralize each other out more times than not, but Munoz might be able to scramble and get top position, I think, more times than he's on the bottom if that's the path that these guys go. This fight, actually, I expect to take place in all areas, mostly on the feet, of course, because of their wrestling game and their jiu-jitsu probably neutralizing everything out, like I said, but still, I think Munoz, he's going to be a little bit more of a threat if it does hit the ground, take the floor a little bit. On the feet, I think he's going to be one of these guys that does push forward. He's got solid power, in both hands, really. He's still developing his, overall striking game, but training with, King's MMA and Blackhouse and those guys over there, he's developing that striking game a little bit faster than most expect, actually. So he's a threat in any aspect of this game. So even though Assuncao is going to be more technical and I think is going to probably be the better striker on the feet, I think Munoz is going to hang in there with him, and push the pace and look to basically outstrike Assuncao. I don't know if he's going to have that success, though. And I also do think that Assuncao will be savvy enough to understand that Munoz is going to look for takedowns and keep this thing up, right? So you got to give the slight edge to Assuncao. I'm not sure if the line right now where it's at, and I should mention that as well, right now it's staying steady at 5 dimes at minus 210. I'm not sure if you can confidently bet Assuncao in that spot because Munoz, again, bantamweight fights tend to be close and competitive, and Munoz is going to be one of these guys that's going to be more than competitive, I think, with Assuncao. So he could be another spot where he's possibly a live dog, but you do have to give the edge to Assuncao. I mean, he's coming off some very solid victories as of late. I mean, his last fight against TJ Dillashaw, have to mention that briefly. A lot of people were thinking it's a controversial decision, but make no mistake, he was very competitive in that fight, and I mean, he was game enough to actually win the fight. A lot of judges probably would have scored it that way. So, controversial decision, yes, but hard to argue that he didn't win that fight also. So, Assuncao been fighting awesome competition, and Munoz is just going to be another step towards the title if he gets his W, but I think it's going to be harder than most people think. But I am picking Assuncao to probably get the win here.
And I have to agree, while Munoz is a solid fighter overall, this is just such a difficult spot for him coming in and facing a guy ranked in the top 5 in the world at 135 pounds for his UFC debut. I mean, major props to him for even wanting to take this fight, but I think it's going to be really difficult for him. I mean, Assuncao, the biggest advantage Munoz has here overall is probably the age gap. You know, Assuncao is 31, Munoz is 27, but I don't think that's going to be too much of a difference here. And Munoz is better overall on the ground, although Assuncao, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's very technically sound on the canvas. Munoz is just a little slicker. But on the feet, Assuncao should just be able to outwork him. Well, maybe not outwork him, but he should be able to outpoint him and get the job done, because I think Assuncao is more of a counter striker. He will, be on his back foot. Kind of like he's not Machida, but that's just this type of style that he has where he moves backwards, he scores points, he lands, his opponents usually don't. He's pretty good defensively. And I think Munoz, there's really nothing that special about him in terms of striking. He's not that powerful. He does have a little bit of a diverse offense, but it's not very technical. And overall, his takedown defense isn't even that good. So, if for some reason he's actually outworking Assuncao on the feet, I think Assuncao could potentially take him down, and Assuncao is at least well versed enough to just stay on top of him. I don't see that happening that much, but the most likely thing I see happening is Munoz having a little bit of trouble getting the fight to the canvas, and then pushing forward and Assuncao just picking him apart a little bit from distance, with jabs, with counters, with everything, because overall, Assuncao probably wants to keep this fight standing. Assuncao is pretty sharp there. He doesn't have a lot of power, but again, he usually just outstrikes his opponents, no matter what. Now, Munoz is the RFA champion. He has an extremely bright future. He could potentially be in the same spot that Assuncao is in right now in a year or two, but I just think that overall, while Munoz is extremely talented. This is just a little bit too much too soon for him. So give him another year and maybe he beats Rafael Assuncao. But I just don't see him doing it in his UFC debut. I think it's just going to be a little too tricky for him. Although Assuncao does have a habit of letting fights get really close even if they shouldn't be. So Munoz has a chance, but it's slim to none to me. So my pick is Rafael Assuncao, probably by decision. Now, the final preliminary fight is a very intriguing women's bantamweight contest featuring top contenders Alexis Davis, who is 15-5 overall, taking on Jessica Eye, who is 11-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened actually Alexis Davis as a decent favorite, minus 185. The comeback on Jessica Eye was plus 145. And now looking at the time of the recording, I should say, looking over to 5-9s, Alexis Davis is minus 150. The comeback on Eye is actually plus 130. An interesting thing is that, Alexis Davis, I believe, did get bet up originally and then some action, back in on Eye. I'm expecting a very competitive fight. I should say I'm very biased. I know Jessica Eye and I'm an Ohio guy, so I'm a little bit biased in my opinion with her. But at the same time, this is a very, again, competitive type of fight. I think that Alexis Davis is an awesome fighter. I mean, she's the more complete fighter in this case. I think that her overall MMA game, if she uses it well, could possibly win her this fight. I mean, I think especially her ground advantage in this spot against Jessica Eye is what she really should look for and utilize against Jessica Eye, because if any weaknesses at all that I've noticed, it would be that even though she's got decent takedown defense and a decent ground game overall, I think Alexis Davis can still capitalize and maybe submit Jessica Eye on the ground. I think she's that much above and ahead of Jessica Eye right now in that spot. But the truth is, Alexis Davis's takedown accuracy isn't very good. I mean, she does look for takedowns and tries to get the fight to the floor at times, but she doesn't have as much success as most people would like her to have, especially if you're going to bet her here in this spot. She does have decent takedown defense as well, but I think this fight is going to end up playing out more so on the feet. And it should be a firefight on the feet as well, because Alexis Davis, her stand-up continues to improve. I think she mixes things up probably a little bit better with Jessica Eye, because she throws in her kicks, I think, a little bit better. But I think Jessica Eye has the better boxing, and I think she has the better movement, and she has the better timing with strikes as well. So this is going to be a barn burner back and forth, and I think it's going to be another very competitive hit the cards type of fight. And I really don't see a finish in this spot. I think we probably will see it hit the cards, like I said, but if there is a finish, I think it's, again, Alexis Davis maybe catching Jessica Eye in the sub. But if not, if it hits the cards, you almost got to go with Jessica Eye here. It's another dog or pass situation, because I do believe that it's going to be close enough that you really don't want to lay the juice in this spot. Both girls are extremely talented, and if it does take place on the feet, Jessica Eye does have a slight advantage here. So I'm going to go with Jessica Eye's boxing. I'm going to go with her footwork, and I'm going to go with everything that she's got, I guess, on top of her shoulders right now, with all the pressure, with her failed drug test, or that situation that she has going on. I know she has a lot of personal issues that her dad's dealing with some things right now as well. So now is not the greatest time, and a lot of people, I think, are going to be possibly thinking that Jessica Eye could be not focused coming into this fight, but from what I've heard in all accounts, she's very focused. She's had the best training camp of her career, and I think she's going to utilize and try to take all that negativity that's around her right now and take it on Alexis Davis. So I think this could be a good thing and a good spot for Jessica Eye if she focuses and gets the job done properly. But I think she keeps it standing, she's going to have a shot to win this. So I'm going to pick Jessica Eye to win a very close and competitive striking bout.
And while I get that line of reasoning, I can't 100% be on board with it. I mean, and don't say it's because I'm biased. I mean, I am the biggest Jessica Eye fanboy, usually overall. I'm from Ohio. I've interviewed her about 5 or 6 times, but I just think Alexis Davis is just a little bit better than her overall. Davis is going to be competitive on the feet with Eye. I think, Eye might be slightly more technical, use the jab more, use kicks a little bit more, but on the feet, Davis really opens up and brawls, and that could be present some problems for Eye. While neither of them are extremely powerful with one-punch power, I do think Davis has the better chin. I mean, Davis had a absolute slugfest with Sarah Kaufman where they were just trading bombs, and Davis ate some shots against Kaufman, and she never went down, and she just kept coming forward. She was like a juggernaut in that fight, although she did end up losing a really close decision, majority decision, I believe. But I think that she's going to present some problems here. On the feet, she's going to put a lot of pressure on Ai. She's going to move forward very aggressively. It's going to be a lot more difficult for Ai to keep moving backwards and outpoint her with the jabs and the kicks. So I think that's going to be a bit of a problem. And then if this fight goes to the ground, Davis is just worlds better than Jessica Ai. I know it was early in her career, but, when Ai was submitted by Aisling Daly at flyweight, that is just warning signs and red flags going off in my head. She really hasn't been put down that often in her career, and she actually has been improving her wrestling and her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but it's not anywhere even close to Alexis Davis. I mean, Alexis Davis finished Shayna Baszler on the ground. I mean, she can do that, then she can finish Jessica Ai easily if she can get her down. So that is something to look out for. And I think on the feet, this is going to be competitive. And I think the pressure from Davis could present problems. It presented a lot of problems for Liz Carmouche in their last fight, which was primarily on the feet. So I think Alexis Davis might be just a little too much overall just with her aggression. So we'll see how it plays out, but it's tough for me to go against Alexis Davis here because I think Alexis Davis is probably going to get that next title shot, especially if she gets this win. So my pick is Alexis Davis. Now, the opening bout of the main card features a very interesting welterweight contest featuring Ultimate Fighter Smashes winner Robert Whitaker, who is 12-3 overall, taking on karate expert Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective here?
Well, close to a pick on my open Thompson, actually minus 130, the comeback on Whitaker minus 110. Man, this is a tough fight. Been going honestly back and forth as far as a pure pick goes because it's going to be a competitive fight. I mean, these guys are both strikers, both very talented at what they do. And really the wrestling base and the submission game, all of the ground aspect of the game, the grappling aspect should be neutralized out here. I think both have decent enough takedown defense overall. That they can kind of fend each other off. So we're probably going to get two strikers doing what they do best, and we're going to see them bang it out on the feet, which is great. That's why it makes things tricky, though, as far as the bet goes. I know, obviously, Thompson is a little bit more of the savvy fighter when it comes to overall striking. I think he's the better overall striker. He has more of an arsenal. He's got that kickboxing background, obviously, slicker with his feet. He does have decent hands to go along with it, but he can kind of explode with different techniques and be a little bit more tricky, and he's very precise when he does that stuff. I mean, he's a very accurate striker. So I think pound for pound, he's definitely the better striker, but Whitaker's boxing is very legit. I mean, the guy hits like a truck. He's very powerful, has good timing with his punches. He can knock you out with either hand. He's that kind of slugger too. So Thompson has to be careful. I mean, he's getting up there a little bit in age. He's still only 31 years old, but definitely Whitaker's the young gun here in this spot. So I think I'm leaning a little bit more towards Thompson in this spot because, like I said, I think he's just a little bit better of the overall striker. My concern though is both of these guys tend to slow down as the fight goes on, but in round 3, I think Thompson is probably going to be a little bit worse off. I think Whitaker's going to have a little bit more left in the tank, and Thompson has to be extra careful in that round because if he does fade like he has in the past, Whitaker's knockout power could be some problems here. But I think that Thompson ultimately lands enough times and more often that he's probably going to win this fight. I expect it to go to the cards, but it wouldn't shock me if this fight does finish inside with how talented these guys are as well. But I'm slightly leaning towards Thompson in this one.
And I agree that this is a really close fight. Robert Whitaker is a very talented young man, and, we got burned with him a little bit when he fought Court McGee, but I think that's just, he has a little bit of trouble facing guys that have such a high pace like that. Now, Thompson does have a pretty good pace, but it's not Court McGee level pace. So I'll be interested to see the dynamics here because Whitaker has very heavy hands and he actually has some pretty good game planning. He's got a decently high fight IQ, training at TriStar. Those guys help him prepare very well. You saw how he fought Colton Smith. I mean, it did lead to him getting dropped by keeping his hands low, but it helped him defend the takedowns and keep the fight standing, and he eventually did win by knockout. So, especially at 23 years old, he has a lot of room for growth. He could be a completely different fighter by the time he steps in the cage. That's something you always have to take into account with the younger fighters, because they always can develop and grow, and there's nothing that makes a guy want to develop and grow more than getting a loss. Now, I do think that the Court McGee fight skews a little bit of the data heading into this, because Whitaker does absorb some strikes. He got outworked in that fight. But overall, I think he is a really solid striker. He primarily sticks to punches, doesn't do a lot of kicks, occasionally throws knees, but, he wants to usually stand and trade with boxing. Now that could be a bit of a trouble here because, Thompson is an amazing striker, very diverse, really unique, especially his kicks. They can come from just about anywhere. Who can forget the UFC debut against Dan Stichkin? That was unbelievable. He's very powerful, sneaky powerful with his punches, especially because I think he just can set them up so unique with that crazy, awkward style and that sideways fighting stance that he uses. So it's going to be very, very awkward for Whitaker to handle that. Now, despite all the awkwardness, Thompson is very technical. Being a karate specialist, he's refined his striking techniques for years and he's really started to adapt them to MMA. So I think overall, Thompson should be the better striker, but I think Thompson's cardio is a big question mark. His ground game is still a big question mark. And Whitaker, while he doesn't use offensive grappling a lot, I think working with TriStar and all those guys, they might be designing a good contingency plan to use the ground game where he can shoot for takedowns and potentially get Thompson on his back. So I'm slightly leaning Whitaker to take a decision here. Not crazy confident in it, but I think he can pull it off. Now, Reed, who do the numbers back up?
Well, you made a lot of good points, and the data supports those points. Whitaker comes out in aggregate as a counter striker that's a little bit slower paced than Thompson, but the data on that striking ratio is skewed because of that McGee fight. McGee really outworked him, and that, I guess, overshadows the first two fights that were a little bit closer for Whitaker, where he was the one outworking his opponents. But Thompson, his stand-up striking ratio is ridiculous. He knows how to stay on the outside and control the cage and throw lots of kicks. He mixes in an abnormally high amount of body kicks. So that's interesting, and you always think maybe he's setting up the head kick, which he did in his debut, using those body kicks. So in terms of accuracy, it's the jab that is favored by Thompson. Punch for punch, he does have the higher knockdown rate, but I'm with you guys. I think this goes to the cards. So then we got to think of who's attempting more strikes first and foremost, and then who's the more accurate guy, and how does defense play into it. The accuracy is kind of a wash. The defense is kind of a wash. It's the pace that is really skewed towards Thompson. And I think that's probably going to be the difference here, because judges are just looking at who's throwing more. And so he's got a really snappy jab. He's a little bit longer than Whitaker, 1.5 inch differential. Not normally something that I look at or consider important, but he is the longer guy. And so, with a snappy jab that lands with very high accuracy, that could be the difference. It's almost a Rory McDonald type build. We'll talk about him later. But Thompson can work from the outside, and Robert Whitaker to date has only attempted one takedown in the UFC over 3 fights. So that, you're right. You mentioned TriStar. I'm speculating that if he's in trouble after the first round, maybe he starts mixing it up more, a bit of game theory into this. But, based on his historical patterns, these guys should just stand and trade, and both of them have been successful in doing it. So it's going to be a competition of who wins those rounds, and winning rounds comes down to volume and pace. So that makes me lean towards Thompson. I'm also with you guys. I'm leaning towards a decision. I think it'll be close.
All right, excellent. Great stuff there, Reed. Now moving on, we have another very interesting welterweight contest with veteran Mike Pyle, who is 25-9-1 overall, taking on young gun TJ Waldberger, who steps into the octagon with a 16-8 record. Now, Nick, where'd you open this one, and how's the public shifted things?
Well, my opening line, Mike Pyle minus 165, the comeback on TJ Waldberger, plus 125. Immediate action coming in on Mike Pyle. Driving line up right now, it's minus 185, plus 160. So more love again on Mike Pyle a little bit. I think it hit over 200 at one point. So some dog action coming back in, on Waldberger. And this is another tough fight. Because if you look at it, of course, Mike Pyle is the more well-rounded fighter. He's the better MMA fighter, and he's been a veteran in the sport for a long time. Has faced better competition, in his career as well. But he's getting to the point, I think. He's 38 years old. He's basically, on the decline of his career, even though he's looked okay, in his last several fights. he did get knocked out recently, obviously, to the hands of Matt Brown, but, he looked good in the Rick Story fight. He, got floored early, but managed to hold off and pull off a controversial decision win, to say the least. But same thing with James Head in that fight. He managed to take some punishment early on, but he came back, landed his own. But that kind of doesn't make me feel good about Mike Powell, his comeback wins. So really, I question where he is at this point of his career. I think that he basically has nothing to lose, which is good for Mike Powell because he comes into his fights with a lot less pressure. But at the same time, I think Walberger is going to come in here. He's also coming off a knockout loss to the hands of Amagov. And I think there's more of an upside Walberger at this point. And I think that even though Powell's going to be the more dangerous fighter because he does have a striking advantage in this fight, he's a very complete fighter, as I mentioned, but Walberger does have the pure grappling edge in this fight. And Powell has been, even though he has a solid wrestling base and has out-grappled very tough grapplers in the past, Walberger's still, I think, at a different level at most times. And I think Walberger could possibly put Powell on his back or get him in some type of scramble and submit Powell that way. So Walberger, I think, is a fresher fighter. He's got bigger upside, like I said. Even on the feet, he's starting to develop his stand-up striking a little bit more. He's developing some power and confidence on the feet. That's not necessarily good because there's a big question mark, obviously, with his chin. He's been knocked out, I think it is 6 times. So that's a huge concern with Walberger, but Powell's been knocked out quite a few times as well. Tough fight. I think it's a dog or pass situation, though, honestly. I would not lay at this point 180 or close to 2-1 on Mike Powell. I think you should probably consider looking at Walberger if you're going to bet this fight. Not saying that that's the way to go here, but I think it is a dog or pass situation, and Walberger, being the fresher fighter, has more ways to possibly win this fight at this point. So I'm going to actually go out and pick the dog here in this spot. Not a very confident pick because of that chin factor, for sure, but I think Walberger's in a good spot to probably pull off the upset win here.
Yeah, the chin there completely terrifies me. Honestly, both of their chins terrify me. When Mike Powell and TJ Walberger lose, they usually lose in devastating highlight reel fashion. So that's something that does scare me, but something really interesting is the age gap. Powell, 38 years old. He's one of the oldest welterweights in the entire roster, you'd have to believe. And TJ Walberger, just 25. So a lot of fight experience for Walberger despite, just the young age. Now, that does scare me though, because, as fighters get older, their chins get worse. And Walberger's chin is already really, really bad. Already being knocked out so many times. So, how much worse could it possibly get? It's definitely not going to get better. He could take 2 years off, come back, and still be in big trouble if he gets hit. So that is a huge concern for me. Now, I think Walberger does have a slight advantage in the grappling department. He should be, if he gets the fight to the ground, he's extremely, extremely entertaining to watch. He goes for these crazy, risky submissions. He's scored all kinds of submission of the nights and big time finishes with his grappling. But Mike Powell's, he's a crafty vet. I mean, the guy was the grappling coach at Extreme Couture for years. So he's got plenty of good background in grappling knowledge. So I think that while Walberger should have a slight advantage, it's overall going to be a bit of a wash. So Powell's likely just going to try to avoid the ground altogether. And on the feet, while Walberger has started to get a little better, I mean, he actually did hurt Brian Ebersol standing when they fought. I think Powell, hands down, is the better striker. And on top of that, Powell hits so much harder. So, we've seen Powell just absolutely obliterate a few guys with his stand-up strikes. I mean, he was on pace to have some really nasty 2012 or 2013 with about a streak of about 3 or 4 knockouts in a row. So that's something to look out for, because if Powell connects with something heavy, Walberger's going down. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I just can't trust TJ Walberger's chin enough to confidently pick him here despite the insane age gap. So I think Mike Powell potentially by knockout. I think somebody's getting knocked out either way. Now, Reed, do the numbers back us up?
Oh yeah, on this one, it's interesting. I mean, both these guys hit hard. Both these guys get hit. And, they've received a lot of knockdowns. The age discrepancy is huge on this fight. And yet, I'm looking at this and Walberger, the younger fighter, actually comes out on a punch for punch basis anyway with the worst strike defense and the worst chin rating. So you're right. You're absolutely right. Someone, I think, if they stand in trade, someone's getting knocked out. Now, that may not be the case because Walberger attempts a lot of takedowns. His takedown attempt rate is extremely high, and he does have, he has, gotten people onto the ground, and he does attempt all these crazy submissions. His success rate on those isn't as high as, someone like Ronda Rousey, but, he's certainly attempting a lot of them frequently, and that's gonna win him some points in ground control. So he's gonna plow forward, he's gonna eat a few shots, and he's gonna try to get this to the ground. The question is, can Pyle be, move backwards and be a precision striker and end it early? I think he certainly has that capability. I wouldn't want to bet the farm on that because, Pyle himself has been dropped 3 times. And again, oldest guy in the card. So, if they stand and bang, it's not gonna last long. I am concerned if I were to pick the favorite that Walberg is gonna turn it into a grinder and win rounds on the ground. So I think I agree with you. This is probably dog or pass. But the more confident pick might be that this one just doesn't go the distance.
All right. Excellent stuff there, Reed. Now moving on, we have the third welterweight contest on the main card featuring a pair of top 10 fighters in Rory McDonald, who is 15-2 overall, taking on Demian Maia, who is 18-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective here?
My opening number, McDonald, minus 215, the comeback on Maia, plus 165. That line has been sitting out there a while. So looking over 5 dimes right now, McDonald's all the way up to minus 280, the comeback on Maia, plus 240. So some decent support coming in for McDonald. And I guess I understand why. I mean, the guy's definitely a talented fighter. He's been hyped for such a long time as far as being the next elite welterweight champion, the guy that, wears the throne for a while. I guess after GSP, a lot of people believe that it's Rory Mac that's going to do that. I mean, he's talented enough that I could see that, but at the same time, I think he still has a way to go. And he's gonna get a big test here in Demian Maia. I mean, since Maia's come down to 170, I mean, he had some success at 185, let's mention that as well. But since he dropped to 170, look what the guy's accomplished. I mean, he has a quick win over Kim. I know Kim got injured with that takedown, but still credit Demian Maia for that. He dominated Rick Story like no one else has really dominated Story. And he even smothered John Fitch. I mean, amazing how he grinded Fitch out. So I think as far as grappling credentials go, Maia is definitely elite at 170 and one of the best. I know that Jake Shields out-grappled him in their last bout, I should say, and it was kind of back and forth a little bit with that. And so there's grapplers that he can definitely struggle with, but I don't think McDonald is one of those guys. I think that McDonald's obviously going to look to keep this up on the feet. He does have great takedown defense, and he's going to look to obviously outpoint Maia or even finish him with his striking advantage that he does have. So that's the tricky part here. I know a lot of people were out there confidently laying Rory McDonald here because they believe that he is going to be able to keep this thing up. I'm just not very confident in that. I think Maia, he typically finds a way to get the fight to the floor. He ends up kind of using the cage and climbing on your back and dragging the fight to the floor that way. He's kind of sneaky with his takedown. So McDonald does have several advantages in this fight. Again, he is a better striker. He's going to have a little bit of a reach advantage. He utilizes the jab well, and he's a smart fighter. Always improving his takedown defense, and I know the guys at TriStar, again, are going to have him prepared for Demian Maia. So I got to pick Rory Mac here. I think that he probably can outpoint Demian Maia or possibly even finish him if he does find an opening on the feet. But it's not a very confident pick because I do think Demian Maia could very well be a live dog as far as betting goes. It's a dog or pass situation. I mean, we're going to see if Demian Maia's grappling and his BJJ is good enough to upset somebody like McDonald. But for right now, I would say you have to go with McDonald to win this fight.
And I agree. I mean, I've been riding the Rory McDonald hype train for years, so I was clearly disappointed by his performance in his last fight against Robbie Lawler. But this is a winnable fight for him. The main thing he has to do, hands down, he has to keep it standing. Because Demian Maia is an absolute beast when it comes to grappling. The guy, when he gets the fight to the ground, you are in big trouble. He advances positions extremely well. He goes for submissions. He has pretty solid ground and pound. He's just an unstoppable force down there. He's all about the transitions, and there's really hardly anybody that transitions as well on the canvas and is capable of dominating their opponent on the ground with straight jiu-jitsu, not with wrestling, than Demian Maia. So, and what's really startling to me is since dropping down to welterweight, where he actually is fighting people his own size, he's actually been using his offensive grappling much, much more. a lot more like when he made his UFC debut and he was submitting everyone and getting submission of the night every event. So I think he's gone back to his roots a little bit. So that is a little scary, but I do think that Rory McDonald does have solid takedown defense, and it's not just about having good takedown defense, it's about positioning. And Rory McDonald has very good footwork. He works with Faraz Sahabi and those guys constantly to completely improve everything about his game, and you have to be in the right distance to get a good takedown. And if Rory is sitting back, keeping Maia at bay with a jab, it's going to be extremely hard for Maia to get inside and get him on his back. So I really think that Rory being a really big, long, rangy fighter with a solid jab, that's going to present some serious problems for Maia. So Maia is going to have, unless Maia can completely bum rush him and overwhelm what McDonald is capable of doing here with the jab, then I don't really see how Maia gets it to the ground. Now, on the feet, Maia, while he worked really hard to improve it after the Marquardt knockout, he is just not a good striker, hardly at all. I mean, he did rock Mark Munoz, but that's not that impressive, all things considering, and I just don't really like what Damian Maia presents on the feet. He's awkward, he leaves big openings, and I think that he can get picked apart here by Rory McDonald over the course of 3 rounds. So I am relatively confidently picking Rory McDonald, although it is a little scary if Maia is able to get him down. So, Reed, do the numbers back us up?
Yeah, you've covered all the basics, so I guess what this boils down to is whether or not this ends up on the ground, and the key stats here are Maia's takedown offense versus Rory's takedown defense. And so historically, Maia, he mixes it up. He's not very good at shooting. He's a little bit better from the clinch in terms of getting takedowns, but his overall success rate is only 33%. He attempts them frequently, he just doesn't land them very often. On the flip side, Rory McDonald is currently sitting 10th all-time in the UFC for his takedown defensive percentage. He has not been put on his back very often, and I think several of those that landed were earlier on in his career. He's gotten really good at establishing range, using his jab, and not getting taken down. So those two things aligned certainly tend to favor Rory McDonald to keep it standing. And obviously, if it does stay standing, as we've already covered, I'm looking down the stat line, there isn't a single metric on Damian Maia's side of the page that is favored over Rory McDonald, with the exception of Maia being a southpaw, and I don't think that would really come into play here. So he's going to be outgunned, he's going to be outranged. McDonald is going to have the accuracy, the pace advantage. I think Rory is going to really use a snappy jab. He's going to keep his distance. And while there may be some booing from the Brazilians, I don't see him getting put on his back and exploited down there. It's a possibility at some point that he gets taken down over a 3-round fight. But Rory is also trained. He trains as TriStar. He trains with GSP. He's used to trying to fight off submissions. And you know, the word on the street is he holds his own with GSP in grappling matches. So he's not going to be easy to submit, even for a guy like Maia. He might drop a round if he gets put down there, but it's not going to be all 3 rounds. So I'm leading pretty strongly for McDonald. It may go 3 rounds. I'm not confident in a finish, but I am confident in McDonald.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, the co-main event of this card is very interesting because it just got put together last week. We have Daniel Cormier, who is 13-0 overall, taking on former training partner and late replacement Pat Cummins, making his UFC debut at 4-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, honestly, expecting a little bit of a blowout here. I opened Cormier minus 1125, the comeback on Cummins, plus 575. It's funny because one of our guys, Adam Martin, on the side before this fight, or as soon as the fight was announced, kind of mentioned to me, he said, what are you going to open, Cormier minus 1,000? And I kind of looked at him or, said, what? No, he can't be that bad. I mean, Cummins really can't. And you know what? After looking at footage and seeing what I saw and getting into the line, I mean, I had to open it even higher. I opened it minus 1125. And the thing is, now looking over at 5 dimes, he's minus 1,300. And some spots, including in Las Vegas, have him even higher. So I can understand why, though. I mean, it's just a difficult matchup for a UFC debuter like Cummins to come into this spot and beat a guy that was legitly a top 5 heavyweight in the world, making his light heavyweight debut in the division. He's fought better competition. I mean, it's just all sorts of bad for Cummins in this spot, really. I mean, Cormier, of course, a lot of people are hyping up, if anything, that Patrick Cummins has coming into this fight is his wrestling background. I mean, the guy is obviously, he has to get some respect for what he accomplished, as far as the wrestling world goes. No doubt about it, he was elite on that level, and so was Daniel Cormier, in fact. But I still think Cormier is even better than him in that aspect. I think he's going to be able to keep this fight on the feet. And Patrick Cummins is not really ready for Daniel Cormier in the feet. I think he has a lot of development still to do in his striking game. From what I've seen on film against some of those guys that aren't really impressive on his resume that he beat, he got tagged early on in those fights. So if he kind of struggled early on with lower competition to get those fighters to the ground right away and was tagged in those bouts, what's Cormier going to do to him? So I'm actually pretty confident that at one point or another that Cormier actually finishes Cummins. I don't think this does end up hitting the scorecards, because I think at 4-0 and an unproven Patrick Cummins coming into the spot, it's just not a good thing for him at all. So Daniel Cormier, more times than not, should win this fight, and he should probably win it in impressive fashion. So for those of you guys that are going to parlay Daniel Cormier away, I mean, you're not going to get much value at the price right now, but at the same time, it's pretty close to a solid and safe parlay if you're going to add him in.
And I know that Reed is the typical stat guy, but here's an interesting one for you. Daniel Cormier, who is 13-0, has more wins than every opponent that Pat Cummins has faced thus far in his professional mixed martial arts career combined. So I just thought that was funny. Cummins has just faced nobodies who are 10-20 overall in his 4 fights, which he did finish in the first round, respectively. So I guess he's got that going for him. But there's just not a whole lot here. Cummins does have a good wrestling background, as Nick mentioned. He walked on to Penn State and was actually made it to two-time All-American there. So, I mean, he's got that going for him. He actually trained with Cormier in 2004 when DC was preparing for the Olympics. And as he said recently, he made Cormier cry in training because, he was able to take him down or whatever and keep him on his back or something. But that was 10 years ago. Daniel Cormier has been an elite athlete for the last 10 years, whether it was wrestling or in MMA. And Pat Cummins, up until about a week ago, was working in a coffee shop. So, he's just not a full-time fighter. He might be physically imposing and powerful and athletic, but he just does not have the technique, the training, the ability, or the strength of competition to match up with Cormier. Cormier is an absolute monster. He is a fantastic wrestler. He's got some decent power in his hands, although, his hands are a little brittle, so they occasionally break. And Cormier takes people down. He beats them up on the ground. He pushes people into the fence. He beats them up on the fence. He's just very, very difficult to deal with. He just keeps coming and coming. And I just don't see any way that Pat Cummins is able to withstand that, especially now that he's fired Cormier up. And I don't expect Cormier to be reckless, but I do expect Cormier to really go after him. So, I'm extremely confidently picking Daniel Cormier here. Now, Reed, any numbers here to reveal to us on this fight?
Well, yeah, I'm picking this one half blind without any data whatsoever on Cummins. But it is important to look at how Cormier has fared. And remember, all of these stats are based on heavyweight fights before he dropped down. At heavyweight, being very undersized, he's basically the size of a middleweight in terms of his frame, or maybe even smaller. Being undersized against all these big heavyweights, he has performed excellently on the stat line. He has been accurate. He has been high paced. He has controlled fights. He's done damage. He's been hard to hit. He hasn't been dropped. He's got a completely clean chin and clean brain, really. His record is spotless, and his wrestling has been dominant. So he has excelled and proven that he is a top level MMA fighter, and he's done it against much larger opponents. So here he is dropping a weight class. I received a lot of questions while this was still the Rashad Evans fight about what happens when a guy drops a weight class. So I finally did get around to analyzing that. At least from the first cut analysis, it looks like when you drop a weight class in the UFC, you win 55% of your next fights, which is basically a 55 to 45, a 10-point spread in your expected win percentage is equivalent to having a southpaw advantage or a slight reach advantage. It is a tangible amount. And so that extra boost just proves that by getting rid of some of the tail of the tape disadvantages that you have, you tend to do better, which is why people drop weight classes to begin with. So he's been monitoring the weight cut. He's taken that very seriously because obviously he's trying to push himself into a title shot. I do not expect him to falter in this one, and it's important to understand how good he's actually been, and he was that good against larger guys. So here he is, against someone who's more his own size. I expect him to be dominant.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now let's move on to the main event. We have the women's bantamweight title on the line with unbeaten champion Ronda Rousey, 8-0 overall, taking on unbeaten Sarah McMann, 7-0 overall, both Olympic medal winners, surprisingly fighting right as the Winter Olympics are coming to a conclusion. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this main event?
Well, my opener was kind of crazy. Ronda Rousey minus 705, the comeback on McMann plus 435. Right now, line all the way down to minus 460 for Rousey. So some serious support coming in on McMann early on, and I kind of wanted it that way because, man, Rousey's such a popular betting favorite all the time in as far as her lines go with the sports book. So it's not hard to draw action on somebody like Rousey. I mean, everybody in the world's going to want to parlay her and put her in multi-sport parlays as well. So even though the line dropped that much, make no mistake, I bet you most books are at least even with parlays and pretty close to not having a huge decision on this fight. And that's probably a good spot to be in a fight like this. Really, I mean, you probably want to favor Rousey, slightly. I mean, I'm just talking about based on the betting lines here. As far as fight goes, it's an interesting fight. I just think that McMann, I guess, was everybody's potential, girl to beat, Ronda Rousey at one point. I mean, she was the one that had the wrestling background, that had possibly better striking, that was going to make Ronda Rousey stand and bang and possibly would beat her on the feet. That's what everybody thought a while back, really. So the buzz has been going around about Sarah McMann. She was going to be the one to possibly pull off the upset. So I do think that a lot of people still believe that, and they're coming in that way because of that factor. But Rousey, I think, is getting nothing but better, and that's a scary thing about her at this stage of her career. Obviously, she's training with good partners, she always has, but she's also developing some of the other aspects of her game. I mean, she's such a dominant grappler. Her judo's off the hook, and should mention, obviously, both of these ladies are obviously world-class competitors, elite athletes in their own right, so they're both going to be no surprise that they're both going to be successful at what they do. But Rousey, I mean, her judo background, as evident, especially in her last fight against Miesha Tate. Tate has some solid wrestling, and I mean, Rousey was able to neutralize Tate like crazy, end up in top position, and out-grapple her big time. And that's not a surprise about the out-grappling aspect, but the way she went about it was even more impressive. And also taking something else from that Tate fight, Rousey got tagged a few times in that fight, and I wanted to see Rousey get tested a little bit. I know that Miesha Tate's, not a world beater as far as striking goes, but still, she does have a little bit of power. Rousey ate some punches and didn't even phase her at all. So to me, it showed me that she had a chin. She's not afraid to get tagged. Her striking offense actually looked to be a little bit improvement. She kind of has that nasty streak in her, which you like to see in a champion. So Ronda Rousey, always improving, always going to get better. We do hear a lot of hype that her camp, that she's, her stand-up's getting so good. I mean, of course they're going to say that kind of stuff, but I do believe there is something to that. I think that Rousey's going to probably look to strike with McMann and, try to end things that way for once instead of maybe looking at things on the floor, which is a possibility. But either way we look at this fight, it's going to be interesting for sure. I think McMann, if she can manage to land some shots on Rousey, if she keeps this up on the feet, she might have some success because she is a powerful girl, no doubt about it. She doesn't really want to take this fight to the floor because if she does end up in Rousey's guard, I think that Rousey eventually catches her and submits her. So McMahon's best path to victory, is obviously keeping it again on the feet and trying to knock Rousey out, where I think Rousey could probably win this fight on the feet, landing enough effective blows that she could do enough damage to McMann, or obviously I think Rousey will eventually end up on the ground, possibly in top position. Doesn't even need that though to win this fight. So Rousey's the pick here. I mean, it's hard to go against somebody that talented, even though McMann is definitely a worthy opponent.
Now I completely agree with you, Nick. Sarah McMann does have the potential to beat Ronda Rousey, or at least I was one of the people that was hyping her up as a contender for Rousey, but she's getting the shot too soon. She made her UFC debut 10 months ago against Sheila Gaff, who was a completely overmatched opponent and was not a UFC caliber fighter, and she defeated her in the first round, which was great. But she never got that next step up. She just went straight from taking on someone that she clearly should have defeated to fighting for the title. She was supposed to fight Sarah Kaufman last August, which would have been the perfect step up for her to potentially get a title shot. But she had to back out. She was dealing with a whole bunch of personal issues. I'm not exactly sure what they were, but it's not a good thing when you're stepping out. Like, who knows what her mental state is right now. And then all of a sudden, the next fight she gets, she's taken on the undefeated champion. So that's a lot of pressure on her. Granted, she's been in the Olympics, so I don't think pressure is going to be too much of a deal here. But I just think Ronda Rousey at this point in their careers, especially without McMann having that opportunity to get that next step up, is just going to be too much for her. Rousey is better than McMann in pretty much every metric except offensive wrestling. And I think Rousey holds her own in that department too, because her judo counters wrestling so well. So I see Rousey being able to outstrike McMann on the feet. McMann is not a very good stand-up fighter. She actually got rocked by Shayna Baszler 2 fights ago in the main event of Invicta 2. And I think Rousey could potentially knock her out if it stays standing. And then if it goes to the ground, Rousey is much more of a finisher. McMann is more of a decision control-based fighter, although she will open up with ground and pound if the opportunity presents itself, but I don't see Ronda leaving those big openings. I mean, Ronda, if she gets taken down, she is going to be attacking. I mean, there is no better position for an armbar than just being in your closed guard. So I can see Ronda constantly attacking, constantly working, constantly looking to transition, to get on top, to throw up armbars from bottom, to sweep, to everything. So I think this is going to be a really tough matchup for Sarah McMann, because even her best attribute could get countered by the UFC champion, who is potentially the best at that in the entire planet. So, and then you also throw in the age here. Rousey's 27, McMahon's 33. So McMann has a little bit more wear and tear on her overall. She's been around the block. She's, even had a kid and everything. So, I'm just not sure that Sarah McMann is ready for this fight, and I think it's going to show on fight night this Saturday night. So my pick is Ronda Rousey, and I think she gets a stoppage at some point. I'm not sure when, because it could be from strikes or submissions, but I definitely see Ronda Rousey stoppage. Now, what do the numbers tell us, Reed?
Well, you guys are exactly right, and with almost no data on McMann, I've only got 4 minutes from that first fight, and of course, with such a small sample size, the numbers are skewed all over the place. She landed 1 power head strike out of 1 attempt, so her power head strike accuracy is 100%. You could easily look at that and think, wow, she might have some striking skills, but that was against Sheila Gaff, who was just plowing forward in a silly game plan and got put on her back. So it's obvious. She's got great wrestling. She landed 2 for 2 takedowns in that first fight. Ronda Rousey, also very aggressive with her takedown attempts. She's got 71% accuracy on a much larger sample size. She's very good at taking people down. The difference, of course, is that Rousey can do it from the clinch. She can use those hips. She can flip people over. She did it very impressively against Miesha Tate in the last fight. That's, if she wants to get to the mat, that's how she does it. She gets close range. She gets tied up. And then in the blink of an eye, next thing you know, someone's flying through the air. Ronda Rousey is excellent at that. She's also excellent at the armbar. The average success rate for an armbar is only 23%. Her success rate is 75%, which is 3 times the UFC average. She's really good at it, and those 2 misses were both Miesha Tate, who she eventually tapped by the armbar. So she gets it one way or the other, even if it takes, Miesha Tate basically worked on defending that armbar for months and months and months, and she was able to survive the first round, make it all the way to third before eventually tapping. I don't think McMann has had the same period of time to be focused just on that. I mean, this fight got announced almost immediately after Ronda Rousey's last fight, and this is the shortest turnaround for a UFC champion tied in history. So Ronda Rousey or Sarah McMann has had almost no time, like less than 2 months, to actually really think about how serious this is, that she needs to be able to defend an armbar in her sleep in order to get through a fight with Rousey, and I don't think she's going to be prepared for that. I do think Rousey will eventually get the finish, and there's no way you can pick against Rousey in this situation.
Thanks, Reed. So that'll do it for our complete UFC 170 event breakdown. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Premium Oddscast if you want to get the first crack at our free bets, which are usually released on Friday night following the weigh-ins. With several other events from multiple promotions coming up, including the start of the Bellator season, we will likely have more free plays to give out. We'll also email them to you if you send a message to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com, and I promise, the only thing we'll be sending out is free bets, no spam or anything. You can also like our Facebook page, The Premium Oddscast, for all the latest updates on the show, as well as some helpful articles and occasional videos. Last but not least, check out our co-host Reed Kuhn's new book, Fightnomics. It's available via Kindle download or on paperback via Amazon.com, and there's a link to it on the MMAOddsbreaker.com homepage. Special thanks to our sponsor 5 Dimes. Good luck everyone, and hopefully the betting odds are on your side.